A young 21-year-old man recently went completely viral on social media for saying the most blatantly true, obvious statement that only Gen Z would have the balls to say. He said what literally all of us are thinking. He did not consent to being born, and therefore he shouldn't have to work, and his parents should just support him for life. And of course, all the delusional boomers and corporate chills totally lost their minds in the comments, claiming that this is just another example of the Gen Z snowflake mindset, that he's being a taxpayer burden to them personally, all the usual nonsense. And we're going to be systematically dismantling these delusional criticisms in absolute spectacular fashion, per usual. When you hear a statement like this, you might have an initial negative knee-jerk reaction, but that's just because this soft, sensitive snowflake society has just been so stupid and so cucked for centuries that they somehow managed to convince you that magic, sugar-coated lies are somehow the truth and that the actual truth is something we should react disgusted by somehow. Let's fully break down his statement, word for word, piece by piece, just to see whether it's true or not. Let's put aside all the stupid societal brainwashing for just a second and only focus on whether or not it's true. Not whether it sounds good, not whether it's politically correct, not whether it's comfortable to listen to. Only the truth matters here. I don't get why it's so hard for every other generation to hear the truth, but let's at least try. If I didn't ask to be born, why do I have to work now? Okay, so let's break this down. Is it or is it not a factual, true statement that he did not ask to or consent to being born? I'm not asking if it sounds good to hear. I'm asking, is it or is it not true? As far as I can tell, yes, 100%, 1000%, absolutely, it's true. I don't remember being a spirit, a wisp, a strand of consciousness, whatever we were before we entered this godforsaken earth, and being first asked for my permission as to whether or not I even agreed to being born and eventually being forced to work in the first place. If someone can prove me wrong factually, not emotionally, but factually prove this statement wrong, I'm more than happy to listen. But you can't prove it wrong because it is the objective truth, and older generations just don't like how it sounds because they're too cucked to accept the truth. Any rebuttal to this true statement is just an emotional reaction and not an actual logical argument. You can react negatively to it all you want, but you can't prove it's factually incorrect. So, with that being said, let's move on to the second half of the blatantly obvious true statement. If he did not ask to be born, which we've already established, then why should he be forced to work? Shouldn't the people who forced him to be born without his consent, aka his parents, then be expected to support him? I literally don't see any logical reason why not. Again, all we're doing here is telling the truth. And a longtime subscriber of mine, Cyclops, once posted a brilliant comment where he articulated this absolutely perfectly. It's not your fault that you are a burden to your parents. That is a burden they signed up for and requested for that they didn't have to. You didn't consent to being born. You didn't ask to be born, request them, or this world. They could have and should have used one or multiple forms of many birth control and or aborted if it failed. Telling you you are a burden on your parents is narcissistic gaslighting and blame shifting. They are trying to narcissistically scapegoat you for their dumbass decision to have kids they knew they couldn't afford and didn't have shit for before they even had them. And they automatically put the kid in a bad position, so for no good justifiable reason at all, you don't owe your parents, and you are not obligated to love or tolerate them if they are not genuinely good people. Now, the one counter argument I've seen to this is, well, they only signed up for and agreed to this burden until the age of 18. After 18, they're off the hook. Now, this may be true legally speaking, but it doesn't mean it's right morally speaking. Just because the law says something doesn't mean it's the morally right thing to do. There used to be laws allowing children to be married off at the age of 12, allowing children to be forced to work in horrible factory conditions. Even today, there's all kinds of dumb laws that still exist, such as it being illegal to sell Limburger cheese on Sundays in Texas. Yes, that actually is a real law that still exists. You get the point here. We can have an actual nuanced conversation about whether or not something is right, regardless of whether or not it's technically legal. And yes, by law, they technically technically only signed up for this burden up until the age of 18. However, this was a one-way contract that they, and only they themselves, signed without the consent of the other party at all. I never consented or agreed that I'd be ready to start working by the age of 18. I never consented or agreed to the idea that I'd somehow have to find a job in this god-awful, piss-poor economy and job market by the time I was 18. I never consented or agreed to the idea that I'd ever get a job or work at all, ever. Even if it were a perfect economy with plenty of good paying jobs, it'd still be wrong to force me to work because I still never consented to or agreed to the terms of getting a job by the time I'm 18. But the fact that it's a horrible economy with few and far between shitty paying jobs makes it even more egregious, nonsensical, and just flat out ridiculous that we're being expected to, forced to, and gaslit into accepting a contract that we literally never agreed to or consented to in the first place. And the funny thing is, we all intuitively actually know this to be true via, well, plain old good common sense. This is why we don't let minors sign legally binding contracts, generally speaking, before the age of 18. So we don't let people sign legal contracts before the age of 18 because everyone can agree that you can't really consent to anything when you're a minor. So you can't consent to anything when you're a minor, yet you can consent to something before you were even born? Make it make sense, please. How does it make sense that we have a universally imposed societal-wide rule of working a miserable job your whole life that we just force everyone to abide by as if they ever agreed to it in the first place? Hopefully by now you're starting to see it's not the Gen Z viewpoint that's crazy here. It's the mainstream societal viewpoint that's the truly insane one. Gen Z only seems crazy because our society was built on a lie for such a long time, and this was literally the only generation who had the balls to finally tell the truth.
So true. Love your channel. First off, I didn't even want to be or consent to being born. So of course I'm not interested in being a wage slave either. Birthing someone who did not want to or consent to being born and calling them lazy because they don't want to work is like if I was to break into someone's house and tranquilize them in the middle of the night and kidnap them. And the next thing you know, they wake up in a UFC ring with a jacked roid-raged UFC fighter inching their way about to beat the snot out of them. And the person looking around saying, "How did I get here? I want nothing to do with this place, this fight, or that UFC fighter." And me sitting in the stands calling them lazy because they don't want to fight. Calling someone lazy is just a shaming language to shame someone into being a good slave or doing whatever you want them to do. Pay it no mind at all. If I was so lazy, my parents should have just left my lazy ass in non-existence. Notice how these royal families and people born into wealth all these years never do any of these jobs and they don't get called lazy. But if you are born poor and you don't want to do that shit, all of a sudden you are lazy. Fuck out of here.
So, I want to take a second to address a stupid, brain-dead rebuttal I always see when it comes to this conversation. If you didn't consent to being born, you can just unalive yourself if you don't like it. This is literally the dumbest, most brainless knee-jerk rebuttal I've ever heard. This dumb logic is not only stupid, it's dangerous, because it can be used to justify literally every crime, atrocity, and abusive situation ever. Let's say you kidnap somebody off the street without their consent, and you lock them in your basement and you force them to work for you. He then tells you this is bullshit because just as with being born, you forced him into this situation without his consent and he rightfully doesn't like it. And then you just tell him, hey, if you don't like it here, you're always free to just unalive yourself. This logic is so bad that it could literally be used to justify everything from slavery to the Holocaust. By this logic, people being forced into slave labor or concentration camps could just be told by their captors, yeah, you know, I did force you to be here without your consent, but hey, if you don't like it, you can always just unalive yourself. And this isn't even an exaggeration. This type of gaslighting is exactly what's going on in the modern day. To force us into accepting modern day wage slavery. This whole thing has been the biggest con, grift, and psyop ever into getting us to accept their piss poor dog shit wages, forcing us into the modern day corporate wage slave jobs that we never ever agreed to, consented to at any point ever. The real truth. The truthful statement this young man said goes far beyond simply an edgy meme for social media. This is actually a great starting point for real life policy changes that honestly should have happened a long time ago. The second typical boomer response to this true factual statement is that if he doesn't work, then the rest of us have to work to support him. This may seem to be the case on the surface level, but once again, let's just break down why this is just factually incorrect. Capitalists are notorious for dishonestly manipulating history, nature, and science to keep their wage slave system running. They'll tell you that forcing you to work isn't slavery because you'd have to work in nature anyways. They invoke science and nature to push their false narratives, but the actual scientific facts and evidence prove their own logic is total, flat-out horseshit. The amount of work it takes to survive in nature is very little. 2 to 3 hours per day at most, certainly nowhere near 40 hours a week that we have to work today. Anthropological evidence and modern day field research on hunter-gatherer tribes has shown uncontested, unanimous proof they only worked about 2 to 3 hours per day at most, and the rest of the time they spent on rest and leisure. And even through most of history, everyone from the Roman Empire to the Middle Ages worked significantly less than us. Even urban Roman slaves didn't have to work anywhere near as much as we have to today. And here's the thing. Not only should we not be working significantly more than them, we should even be working significantly less than them. We have so many machines, computers, robots, and now AI that can do a lot of the work for us. Technology should have allowed us to work even less, perhaps even not at all. So why didn't it? Why did it actually do the opposite? Simple. Corporate greed. The rich are richer than ever, and since this has happened, we've worked more and more than ever. All the profits are going to them, and this is why we have to work 2 or 3 times as much as people in the past. We're not working to support ourselves at this point. The scientific proof has proven that would only take 2 to 3 hours per day. We're working 8 hours a day or more, 10, 12 at this point, for the boss to buy another yacht and go on another pointless, stupid vacation. That being said, there is a certain group of people, a very specific demographic, who are the real leeches, the real parasites of society, who don't want to work themselves and are a burden to the rest of us. And those would be the very baby boomers themselves who shame you for not wanting to work. Funny how everything they accuse you of is literally just a projection of themselves. If there's anyone who's the epitome definition of not working themselves while being a burden to the rest of us, it's them. Most landlords are boomers, and landlords are actually the biggest welfare parasites of society that the rest of us have to work to support. It takes no work to be a landlord. All you had to do was buy a property a long ass time ago when it was way cheaper to do so, and of course screw up the real estate market for all the rest of us. And now the rest of us young people have to work overtime, 2 to 3 second jobs, 2 to 3 side hustles to pay these ridiculous rent prices so that you can sit on your ass collecting rent, doing nothing all day. And I know some corporate chills in the comments are going to be calling me a communist who wants to take away people's private property, so I'll leave you a quote. As soon as the land of any country has all become private property, the landlords, like all other men, love to reap where they never sowed and demand a rent even for its natural produce. This was a quote that made me realize just how much of a parasitic burden boomer landlords are to society. How much the rest of us have to work so they can sit on their asses doing nothing, collecting rent all day. Now let me ask you, who do you think said this quote? You probably think it was a hardcore communist like Mark, Stalin, or Mao, right? Nope. The person who said this quote was actually Adam Smith, the father of capitalism himself, in his book that was the defining foundation of capitalism, The Wealth of Nations. So yeah, it's gotten to a point where your modern day capitalist logic is such horseshit that the father of capitalism himself would even call it horseshit. In fact, he already explicitly did in your own favorite capitalist book, The Wealth of Nations. Conclusion. Alright guys, I don't really have much to say in this conclusion other than what you'd already expect. Gen Z is once again totally right, and all these dumbass older generations are totally delusional and are just too cucked to accept the truth. And I'm not only totally on board with this young man here, I find it absolutely infuriating that it took this damn long to just simply admit the truth. And this is why ultimately Gen Z has literally been the only generation with balls and the willingness to tell the truth. And this is also why Gen Z could be the generation that starts an explosive political revolution that finally changes the world for good. We explore this more in this video right here. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.